And we are here today to talk about our Russian River Valley release, which is live right now. So we're super excited to share our 2024 vintage with you. If you have any questions, we would love to see them. So please put them in the chat. Otherwise, it'll just be me interrogating Julien. And yeah, we are starting off with a really special wine today. This is the one 2023 you may see in the release because this is our sparkling. So this is Kiefer Ranch Blanc de Blanc. Kiefer Ranch is in the heart of the Green Valley in the Russian River Valley. And it is on its lease for sparkling or entourage for 2 years. So it's a year behind the rest of our release schedule, but it is Russian River. And when did we disgorge this, Julien?
August 5th or 6th.
So this is super fresh, really new, really beautiful. So we're super excited to have you join us today, and cheers.
Cheers. Yes, thank you. So we're starting with the 23 Kiefer Ranch Blanc de Blanc. So it's a sparkling wine made from Chardonnay grapes from none other than our very own Kiefer Ranch. And we've been making sparkling wine now since 2020. And actually, this part of the vineyard, which we've owned the vineyard since 2015. This lower part of the vineyard has always gone to the majority of the production to sparkling wine. But we used to sell the grapes to different sparkling producers. And, before we bought it, it went to Schramsberg. It was a big part of their program, and they actually own the other half of what used to be Kiefer Ranch. So a lot of those grapes still go into their sparkling wine. But in 2020 was the year that we decided to, basically produce the sparkling wine ourselves, and produce a sparkling wine. And yeah, I do remember that moment we decided to do that. It was kind of like, hey, you know what? It's the middle of the pandemic. Like, we got all this fruit. Should we use it? Should we make a sparkling wine? We had never done it before. And it was pretty quick and easy to say, I think we're ready. We actually, in 2015, we wanted to make a sparkling wine from Kiefer. We kind of committed to it, but ultimately, right before the vintage started, we said, we need to continue to refine the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay before we take on this extra super technical thing, which is sparkling wine. And the time was right in 2020, and we're really lucky because Kiefer Ranch is an incredible site. I think all of our members know Kiefer Ranch for Pinot Noir. Makes a really beautiful, elegant Pinot, which we'll taste as well. And the sparkling wine it's fantastic. And a lot of the feedback we've been getting so far from a lot of people is that this is punching way above its weight in terms of it gets mistaken for champagne, but it's got that extra layer of generosity because it's from Russian River, it's from California. In some ways, we definitely did our homework in terms of how we wanted to make this wine, but Paige mentioned 2 years entourage, which basically means, we ferment the grapes, we age the wine in barrel, it goes into stainless steel for a couple months, then we bottle it with an active fermentation inside the bottle. Once that fermentation is over, we have the bubbles, right? But all that lees kind of settles out to the bottom of the bottle, and it ages on the lees, which is the entourage, for 2 years. And that's a really critical part of the decision in terms of, the style of wine you're going to make, because it helps enrichen the wine and gives the wine more body and texture and complexity. And, a lot of people who make really nice sparkling wines, they go for 3-5 years, and we decided 2 years was actually like enough because the base wine was already had a good amount of body, good generosity. And I think that was probably the best decision we made, in terms of matching this wine with the process. And because it's got, it's already got plenty of richness, and it's got freshness. And it's just every year when we taste the vintage after disgorging, which is when we kind of take we do a little bit of dosage. It's got 3¼ grams of sugar added,
which is extra brut. So everyone knows it's still extra dry.
Extra brut, very, very dry, at the very, very dry spectrum. But every year we taste it after disgorging, my reaction has always been, I think this is the best one yet. Which is not to discredit any of the previous ones because they've all been good, but every year they continue to just kind of impress. which is
Well, and
great.
I've been really impressed with how this is aged, which for champagne, and if you love aged champagne, which I do, we've seen these develop with a lot of really beautiful elegance and develop some of those rich notes you get. And then you have this really bright, fresh, beautiful wine if you want to drink it right away.
Oh, yeah.
For those of you tasting along with us today, we do have our current release, but we did pull some bottles from the cellar to see how they're tasting, how they're drinking, also Russian River wines. So the three wines that we picked today to feature are our Russian River Valley Appellation wine. So we have the 2020 of that to taste alongside the 2024. But we pulled a 21 Treehouse to taste alongside the current release Treehouse, and then a 22 Kiefer Ranch. So we're going to kind of see those are all three really different vintages. If you have any of those and you want to open and taste with us, we'll get to see how they're drinking. And we can talk a little bit about when and why to open your wines.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
So Julien, I think the for this release, we're focused just on the Russian River Valley.
Yeah.
And so, what to you makes the Russian River Valley such a special place?
Well, all the great Pinot Noir growing regions in California are kind of defined by the coast and the cooling impact that the coast has. But Russian River Valley has something kind of that goes a little bit beyond that because there is we're kind of protected from the ocean based on a series of hills and mountains, between the Pacific Ocean and, Sebastopol, kind of Santa Rosa area. Um, and so it's almost like a metering mechanism that the fog kind of has to work a little harder to get to us, but also we get higher daytime highs than most other areas. Like, we work in obviously San Lucia Highlands, Santa Rita Hills, Anderson Valley, Sonoma Coast, of course. But there's just something about Russian River, and it can't quite be described and distilled so easily. But at the end of the day, we have this really incredible, the diurnal shift, which is like if you had to take a sip every time that you say diurnal when someone's talking about Russian River, you wouldn't be standing straight for soon. But the point is, we get these really high daytime high, high 80s, sometimes low 90s, which for Pinot Noir is pretty warm. But that only lasts for 4 hours, maybe 6 hours, and then that cool fog, that cool wind comes rushing in the afternoon. And so you get this big temperature curve. And so you get this really profound fruit character, this big, beautiful, very approachable, fresh fruit, maybe a little bit of blackberry, but a lot of red fruit, strawberries, cranberries. And there's just an extra layer of polish that I find that Russian River is distinct from some of the other regions. I mean, the other regions are also really unique and excellent in their own way, but Russian River has this polish, this depth, this concentration. I tell this story from time to time that when we're blending, we often blend the Russian River last. And as we're working our way through all the different blends that we make, usually by the time we get to Russian River, we're pretty tired. Like it's a relatively short season.
Yeah.
We're tasting a lot, almost every day. And then we get to Russian River and we may start with the Kiefer or the Treehouse or the bootleggers. And you kind of get those first couple blends going. You put it to your nose, you put your nose to the glass, you take your first sip, and like there's just like this smile that comes across all of the faces because it's so good.
Yeah.
And there's just this pleasure, this generosity, this approachability that is kind of unmatched from the other appellations, and I love that about Russian River. I think it's really special. And Russian River, it has the best reputation. It's the most reputable region, and I think it's really well earned. So
I remember the first time I visited Russian River because I was living on the East Coast and working on the East Coast as a som, and you read all the textbooks, you're studying all the things, and we literally like got off the bus And they thankfully where we were tasting, they had like fire pits set up because it was summer and it was freezing. And we're all like wearing blankets around like in the redwoods. And then by noon, like you don't have to take off all your layers because it's suddenly 80 degrees. And it's a really specific thing that's kind of hard to believe, but it really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, to Paige's point, the mornings are very cool. They can be pretty gray. Um, but as soon as that fog burns off around 10:30, it gets hot quick. Like we're talking 15 minutes.
Mhm.
It'll go from 65 to 78, quick.
Yeah,
And then, the daytime high will be like 85 to 90. So it's pretty special.
it is.
And it's very unique.
Well, and that's one of the things that helps a lot of our wines maintain their acid,
Yep.
right?
That
Which
too.
for me, I think, Julian speaking about the polish and all of those pieces of the wine, I really love you get this beautiful fruit, but you keep the acid. So you have this gorgeous balance in the wines, which sometimes with super fruit forward wines, you can lose that. And I think it's a really special thing in the region.
Yeah. Yeah. The cool nights definitely keeps the acidity there. And so it's just a dynamite appellation. So we're offering all of the appellation, wines that we make from Russian River Valley, Kiefer, Treehouse, Bootleggers, Juicy, Kiefer Sparkling, El Diablo Chardonnay, Bootleggers Hill Chardonnay. What am I forgetting?
Four
That's
barrel.
it. Four barrel Pinot Noir. So it's a good offering, and it's top of class stuff.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Well, should we taste
Okay.
some Pinot?
Let's do it.
Fantastic.
Start with the Kiefer.
Great.
We'll pull 24 first. So, 2024 vintage. So this is the first time that we're releasing the 24s. So, and that is music to my ears because for a long time, up until now, we used to start releasing our 24s in the spring prior, so 6 months ago or so. And that was always, that was what we always did. And I always just wish we could get a couple more months of bottle age on the wine. And here we are. We've done it. We've kind of stalled the release a little bit, and we are now sending the wines at a better time for the wine for you. I don't get to use the excuse or say, please just hang on to your wine for 3 to 4 months because it could use a little bit more time. Yeah, the wines are ready. They're all ready. They always are ready, but as a winemaker, you kind of want at least 6 months in bottle, and all these wines definitely have 6 months in bottle from the time that they were bottled. And so 2024 was a really, really good vintage. We are blessed in California. It's another one of our strong suits is that we do have very consistent, very, very reliable seasons. Every once in a while, you'll hear us talking about, a really hot vintage or, 23, for example, was a pretty cool, long vintage. But at the end of the day, they're all really good, and they're, you can tell a little bit the differences from vintage to vintage, and there should be vintage variation, but it's not like other regions or other areas where you get big differences. And big differences can be part of the fun. It can be, I mean, it can make the wine's, spirit a little bit more, I don't know, maybe more interesting or if you like to follow that stuff. But at the same time, you have to be on top of it because, if you're buying a vintage that was a cold year in a certain region and the wines are very light and, they don't have a lot of body and richness, and you buy that expecting one thing, but you get another, you got to stay on top of that. So California, we're very blessed that we have consistent vintages that produce great wines, and 2024 was a great year. We came off of a very wet winter, which is always good to replenish the soil water table, and there wasn't a lot to talk about because the weather was great year round, and so we got to pick the grapes exactly when we wanted to. It was a little bit more, like how we plan things to be, right? Because we're working in a lot of different regions. So usually Russian River comes in first, then Santa Rita, then Santa Lucia, then Sonoma Coast, then Anderson Valley, right? When it goes like that, it's very easy for everybody. when things get jumbled up, that makes it more stressful, a little bit more difficult for us. We always manage, of course, but just with a little bit more effort. And 24 was one of those great vintages that were, really easily to manage.
Love that.
So
So how would you compare that to the 22 vintage? I mean, 22 was
well,
also
22 was a good vintage, but we had a lot of heat, right?
mm,
Labor Day. So Labor Day, it was a big heat wave. It was kind of, almost, you know, yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary heat wave for 3 to 4 days, and it changed everything. Kind of
mhm.
all the grapes kind of got pushed, a little quickly through the finish line, and we were picking like crazy. And that 22 was one of the hardest vintages that I've worked here at Kosta Browne because of how that changed the vintage.
Mhm.
22 is much like 17. The same exact thing happened.
Okay.
Big heat wave in Labor Day. But so 22, I would say, is a little bit of a riper vintage, a little tiny bit higher alcohols, maybe a little bit more fruit forward. Wines that I would say, to be perfectly honest, I would drink the 22 vintage before the 23 vintage and the 21
Mhm.
vintage. I'd probably drink the 22s sooner than some of the other wines because I don't think they'll necessarily age quite as long as the others. And 24 was all about balance. So all about balance for the 24s. We tasted these wines with the staff a week or two ago, as
Mhm.
well as all of our interns. So a lot of these new employees that aren't quite as familiar with our wines. Some of the feedback I got was that they thought Kiefer Ranch was the most like expressive. It was the most aromatic wine. I
Mhm.
think that you mentioned that too, that you were
Mhm.
surprised, like, whoa, this one is really jumping out of the glass right now.
It was, yeah. I think for just being such a young vintage in my mind, super, super expressive right out of the gate. Kefir for me is always this like, I think one of the beautiful things about the consistency in the weather that you're talking about, and we are going to talk about vintage variation anyways, but is that you really get to learn the sites. And so some of that vintage variation is really clear. But Kiefer always has this like friendliness to it. Like to me, it's like seeing an old friend that you haven't seen in a long time and you pick up conversation like you never stopped, like you just started. It's always like so approachable, but you also want to spend time with it. It's got that beautiful finish. It's
Yeah.
bright. It's lovely. Um, it's a delight. I would describe this wine as delightful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and Kiefer is also right in the middle of the Green Valley AVA,
mhm,
which is a sub-appellation within Russian River. So it's kind of like one of those Russian dolls that kind of gets smaller and smaller.
mhm,
But Green Valley is a specific area within Russian River that's defined as being a little bit cooler than Russian River. But what that means in terms of the wine is that the
mhm.
wines tend to be very supple,
Okay.
very, very supple tannins, like just like a warm wool blanket. I don't know, like just it feels good, right? Like it just
Yeah.
feels seamless, supple, generous, really, really enjoyable.
Yeah. These are fun to taste side by side. There's definitely the 22 has that ripeness and a little bit of age, but the 24 is, I think it's still popping out of the glass.
Mhm. Yeah, the 22, in bottle, I find that the wines also gain a little weight, right? So
Hmm.
like what we're tasting in the blends and we put the blend in the tank and then we taste the tank before bottling, they always taste a little bit more rigid, a little bit more tight. And then over time, within the first year, sometimes certainly within the 2 or 3 years, they tend to gain a little bit of weight. They kind of just like soften up and they become, a little heavier. And so I'm feeling compared to the 24, I'm feeling an extra like, an extra weight kind of in the middle of the palate, which
Hmm.
is really nice. But there's definitely, I can see that difference very clearly between
Hmm.
the two.
Yeah, both are really lovely. If you have 22 in your cellar right now, this is
It's very nice.
really expressive, really would be great with dinner,
Yep.
great with barbecue. I don't need to wait for fall. Um,
It can
mm,
kind of go with anything. And that's what's
mhm.
great about Pinot. I mean, Pinot pairs with just about any type of cuisine. My new favorite go-to recommendation when people ask what to pair a Pinot with is Japanese food.
Oh yeah.
Um, I was fortunate enough to go to Japan a year and a half ago for the first time
Hmm.
for a wine for Kosta Browne to help kind of sell the wine in Japan, and uh, I was so surprised with every meal we had, not quite every meal, but certainly every dinner, we were drinking Casa Brown with the
Hmm.
meal, and we were having yakitori, we were having sushi, we were having tempura, we were, doing all these different things, and every time the wine just completely complemented the
Love it.
cuisine. Just, I mean, it was one of those pairings that they didn't just like they didn't just like pair well with each other.
Hmm.
They complemented them and they made each other better, right?
It's
Like
the
the
best.
food was better with the wine was better with the food, and it was really, it was an eye opener for me because sometimes I go think, what is this going to go well with? Like, you're trying to think of some nice meal, but
Hmm.
like something that's also common, but like, man, this Japanese food, it's just
It's
like
great.
easy,
Love that.
easy.
And we do have a question about allocations of the bubbles or the 22 Pinots at a later date. So if you're not seeing the sparkling in your current allocation and you're interested, let us know. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We can see what we can do. If you are able to visit us here in Sebastopol, we do pour the sparkling as part of our flight. So love to share it for you here as well. And for 22, we released that a couple of years ago. But there again, if you're interested, you can always reach out to us and we can see what we may have available, what we can share with you. So please, don't be shy. There's usually secret pockets of things hidden away that we might be able to share with you. So
Hmm.
um, I think we're pouring we are sold out mostly of the 21 bubbles. We're pouring the 2022 sparkling in for the tasting room right now at the winery. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
And 22 is also very good for sparkling. Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So, shall we move on to the Russian River?
Absolutely.
So we are kind of following, the wines that you may see as the six pack that's been offered to some of y'all. Kiefer Ranch is a little bit, in my opinion, one of the more lighter styles of wine
Hmm.
within our offering, right?
Yes.
So Casa Brown and has always been and will always be, a little bit more of a, fruit forward, rounder style, very approachable. And so I always have to, kind of reset myself sometimes when I say,
Hmm.
well, this is the lightest wine. It's like, well, they still all have good texture, richness.
Absolutely.
None of them are going to come across as like lean or light. But within our wines and the Pinots that we make, I find that in 2024, Kiefer Ranch is the lightest style,
Hmm.
softest, most kind of elegant, supple texture. And then we kind of move across Russian River. I consider Bootlegger's Hill Pinot Noir to be the next lightest.
Hmm.
Russian River Appellation wine, kind of right in the middle,
Hmm.
which wasn't by design, but it makes perfect sense. You have two single vineyards that are lighter, two single vineyards that are darker and richer,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, Kiefer Ranch, Bootlegger's Hill, Juicy, and Treehouse are all in Russian
Hmm.
River, so it makes sense it's in the middle. And then you have Juicy Ranch, and then Treehouse is our biggest, most structured, most concentrated,
Hmm.
darkest kind of wine. And so we're going to taste these in order from lightest to richest and kind of darkest. And not every year is it kind of in that exact order, but most years it is because roughly in that order. I mean, bootleggers and Kiefer tend to be the lighter styles. Juicy and Treehouse are definitely the more
Absolutely.
structured, darker styles. And so that's how we're gonna enjoy the wines today.
Great. Well, and that's one of the things that I love so much about our Appellation wines. So the blends of different vineyard states is that all of the single vineyards that you know and love are going into those wines as well. So it really is the best of the best going in to create this regional expression. Um, And I guess I'd be curious to hear, Julian, how you kind of think about the difference between making the Russian River, which you're, putting a lot of different vineyards into that, versus when you're making the single vineyards.
Yeah, well, we're lucky, and one of the things that I preach and I commend our team and our company as a strong commitment to quality is that we our sourcing program for the Russian River Valley blend is extraordinary. As Paige mentioned, Kiefer Ranch, Bootlegger's Hill, Juicy Ranch, Treehouse, all those vineyards contribute a significant portion to the blend. But then we also purchase a number of other vineyards that are gonna be they're designed to be part of this blend, but they're really good vineyards.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're vineyards that could be single vineyards, and they are single vineyards for other folks who buy those grapes. So
Mm-hmm.
really incredible vineyards. So when it comes down to like, well, how do I make the Appellation wine, or if there's any difference between that and the single vineyard wine, one thing that I always try to do is I always try to have a very well-rounded um, pick picking schedule in the sense that I like to pick some grapes, roughly for simplicity, about a third of the grapes. I like to try to get a third of the grapes a touch early,
Mm-hmm.
like just a little bit on the fresher side, a little bit more on the brighter side. And that might be for the Russian River blend, but that might be a whole vineyard. Like, okay, I'm going to take the Zia Tony vineyard. I want to get this early because I want that fresh component in
Mm-hmm.
the wine. And then I'm going to try to hit the bullseye with the perfect ripeness, the perfect everything about it is perfect with a third of it. And then the last third is kind of like, okay, well, how did I fare on the first two
Right.
thirds? Did I miss my early pick? Did I
Mm-hmm.
hit the bullseye on the early pick? Well, then maybe I need to get that one a little early. Maybe I need to get this one a little bit later to kind of make sure I get those ripe flavors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do that same thing with the single vineyards. In a single vineyard, I only have maybe 3 or 4 different blocks, um, sometimes more. And usually I'm picking in much smaller increments, 3.5 to 6 tons. Whereas in Russian River, I'll pick a whole vineyard, which might be 10 or 20 tons, and
Right.
do that multiple times over. Um, Single vineyards, I also tend to put those grapes into concrete and oak fermenters.
Okay.
So the oak and the concrete are prioritized for single vineyard fruit because they tend to make higher quality wines with a little bit more complexity, a little bit more distinction, a little bit more nuance. And over time, we've learned just to pair certain vineyards with the concrete or the wood because
Mm-hmm.
they just kind of they show a little bit better in one versus the other. So you'll tend to see more concrete and oak fermentation in the single vineyards. Not to say that the appellation doesn't, but they tend to have more stainless steel.
Okay.
Stainless steel is a really good fermentation tank as well. It doesn't quite give the wine an extra layer of texture, a little bit of nuance. Concrete, for example, tends to ferment really cold,
Mm-hmm.
so you tend to retain a little bit more aromatics on the concrete. Wood tends to ferment a little warmer, a little quicker, but also it's oak, so it gives a little bit more texture and a little bit more kind of body on the wine. Um, so yeah, and at the end of the day, we do things here very, very hands off. So, we're not adding a bunch of things to the wine, color or any supplements to kind of try to help the fermentation go smoother or adding texture or like doing all this stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
wines and the grapes that we work with are the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I see it is that we can't show the restraint to allow these wines to be expressed naturally, then who can, right? Because
Right.
we really do work with some of the best grapes. And there's other wineries that don't have that luxury, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the wines need a little color. You kind of have to do something to adjust that, whatever it might be. But here at Kosta Browne, we're hands off, and this is a true reflection of the vintage and the the vineyards.
Amazing.
So, and I'm really proud of that. That's something that I think we work really hard to do, and that takes a lot of precision, takes a lot of dedication.
Yep.
And I have a great team. I have a
Hmm.
lot of really, really dedicated, committed winemakers. So we're lucky that all the pieces are kind of in place to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
So, how's the Russian River?
It's good. Well, this is fun because 2020 is the cellar pick that we decided for Russian River, and 2020 was my first vintage at Kosta Browne. And I spent my first, week, 10 days in the cellar with the team.
Mhm.
So got that introduction right away. And 2020 was a more complicated vintage. But I think the thing that stood out to me right away, just like out of the gate in the door with all of the insanity going on around us, was that like team spirit, was that ability that like everybody was in this together, everybody was working together. I was welcomed right away. Julian terrified me that my second day of work, I was saying I was going to be working a Chardonnay press with him. I didn't mess it up. But this vintage, of course, will always hold a special place in my heart. But I think it's showing really. I
Yeah.
mean, if you have this in your cellar, here again, like it's developed a little bit more than the Kiefer. I think the 22, beautiful to drink now. You want to hang on to it a little bit longer. It'll keep developing. This 2020 Russian River really feels like it's in the sweet spot to me right now.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. 2020 was a very difficult year. It was in the middle of the pandemic, so we were all running around with masks on in the cellar. Like honestly, there's people I saw after harvest, and I was like, didn't even recognize them because I was like, I didn't even see your face
Yep.
for the 3 months that you were working
Hmm.
here. So, um, but yeah, no, it was one of those times where um, things were difficult, and we ended up making some killer wines, and I think 2020 was a great vintage in the end. So I'm really really proud of
Yeah,
it.
this is showing beautifully.
Yeah. So yeah, and
Well,
I
and I
think
think, oh no, go ahead.
well, I think 2020 is in a great spot. 2020, they're
Absolutely.
tasting really really good. They're aging beautifully. I would say like I think you were kind of hinting towards this as well. I think the 2020 is maybe showing like just it's showing more youth today than you would think compared to the 22, right? The 22 is
Yes.
showing kind of getting into the secondary, which is normal and kind of to be expected. But this is 2 years older, and this is also kind of in that a little bit in that same
Hmm.
spot. And it's like, yeah, but it's 2 years older, so I think it's
Well,
fine.
I think that's part of, the fruit selection, to your point, having really beautiful fruit to work with allows that ageability. And I think we get asked that a lot, of like, when do I open my wine, how long to age it? And, so much of that is personal preference. If you like that bright, really bright fruit right out of the gate, a younger wine is going to be more your style. If you like something that started to develop, some more like cooked fruit characteristics and even like leather and some, more, you know, even oaky flavors that become more pronounced, you're going to be going for an older wine. And for me, a lot of times, especially for our wines, that 6 year mark is a really beautiful spot where it's just started to get into that middle life. Like it's not 100% primary. It hasn't gone over the edge into, a fully aged wine, but you're starting to get a little bit more development, as a person. If this is graduated from college, maybe it's in its late 20s, it's lived a little bit of life, but it's still energetic, it's ready to go. But
Yeah.
yeah, this is
And then I'm going back to the 24 now, and like like talking about polish and like that kind of white tablecloth
Mhm.
feeling that I really it shows up in the 24. It's going from the 20
Mhm.
especially, which has got a little bit more age on it, going to the newer wine, it's got that supple, very smooth, like very
Mhm.
really beautiful texture. I love that.
Absolutely.
But it is kind of interesting, um, when to drink the wine. When should I drink the wine? It's such a difficult question to answer because it's like I kind of put that back on you,
Hmm.
like, well, what do you like? Do you
Yep.
like fresh fruit? Do you like a little bit of complexity? Do you like a lot of complexity? Like there's some wines that, we'll taste and I'll be like, I think this wine's kind of like kind of maybe getting close to over the edge, And then somebody will show up and be like, I love this. This is so cool. You're like, okay, like, don't give up on the wine. It's, like people love that stuff, right? And
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
can't, it's so hard to tell. And, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you like to drink them young or old, just lean into whatever
Enjoy
it
them.
is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember having a glass of wine with the old CEO of Duckhorn one time, and we were getting to know each other, and he brought a really old bottle of like, it's probably on the wall. I think it was like a 52, some 1952 bottle. And because he was trying to kind of give the winemaker something to kind of, get excited about,
Yeah.
and I like old wine. I love the experience of tasting old wines
Absolutely.
just because in itself, it's just an amazing moment in time. But he was kind of like, "Do you like old wine?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I think they're really cool. It's really fun." I'm like, "Do you?" He's like, "I don't. I like young wines. I just like them when they're fruity and they're fun and they're easy, and I just like that." And it was really refreshing that I remember that very clearly because he was the CEO of the company, of a wine company,
Hmm.
and you would think that either A, they like to drink old wine because they've kind of gotten to that point of their wine drinking journey, or you would have, like just, the more you get into wine, a lot of people like feel like they have to like old wine.
Yep.
But he was just like, no, I like young wine. Like within 2 years of being bottled, that's when I want to drink it. And that was really refreshing that he was so willing to
Mhm.
just like say it with complete open, freedom
Yeah.
and acceptance. It was cool.
Well, and I think wine, I know I keep comparing it to people, but I think for me, a lot of times that's an easier way to describe them, because they develop and they we're using the term aging, right? Like, so as they change, they can surprise you. And I think it's one of the things that I love about Pinot, is that Pinot Noir is so approachable when it's young. You don't have to wait. There's certain wines like when you're thinking of old school Barolo, right? You don't you want to give that a minute. And it also continues to develop really beautifully. So if you want to hold on to it, or spoil yourself and drink some now and hold on to some later and kind of find that journey for yourself. I mean, so far we've had two older vintages and two 24s, and I would be very happy to drink the rest of any of these bottles. I think the other thing I really love about Pinot Noir, especially Russian River Valley for us, is this is such a wine that, I know it's a very American thing to just drink your wine and not have it with food, but beautiful food pairing wines. But if you just want to kick back and have a glass of wine, it's the end of the
Mhm.
day. This doesn't it doesn't need anything else. It can, but you can just open a bottle and enjoy, which is really lovely.
That's all
I
you
know
need.
I'd like to
Yeah.
just have a glass of wine sometimes,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I'm having wine while before, during, and after dinner.
absolutely.
Right? So like when cooking, like get home, yeah, that's I want to have some wine.
Hmm.
Not always, of course, but a lot of times certainly.
Yeah.
And yeah, some wines are easier to enjoy without food,
Hmm.
And like you said, a Barolo is a perfect example of like that's like when you open the Barolo, you put it on the dinner table. Like
Yep.
that needs to be like with food and it needs to have a little age on it, typically. But this wine it's very versatile.
Absolutely.
So
I keep saying absolutely. I guess that's my word of the day. Um,
yeah, but it's very good. Very pure. I love it. We were tasting with the James Suckling critic recently, and Paige was there with me because I like to have her around because she's but I was talking about how I love the fruit character of Russian River. Like that is, I said like, well, like I think that Russian River might be more singular in the sense that there's a lot of pure fruit. But the purity of the fruit is what I think makes it special too. And
mhm.
Paige was like, you know what, I kind of disagree with you because I smell a lot more than just fruit in this wine. So, to say it's singular is kind of cutting it short, I think, because there's a little bit of nuance. Yes, fruit is going to be the forefront, but there's still a lot of nuance to the wine. So I appreciated hearing that because, my impression of the wine is more fruit forward, really pure. really crystallized like fruit character.
Hmm.
And that's what I love Russian River for that. But it was refreshing to hear another person's perspective that says, no, come on, man, like there's more to it than that. So
Well, one of the things for me that comes up sometimes is, we'll say red fruit, blueberry berry, and sometimes it can be like, well, and obviously this is subjective, but for me, like even with my nose in this class right now, like I'm very distinctly getting blueberry and blackberry and cherry. It's not just a maybe berry note. And I do, these wines always have a little bit of like a really lovely, like light floral note. The Bootlegger's Hill, we've talked about this. Like I always get this like kind of almost forest floor and soft herbs, and there's some other things there. The fruit is definitely the star of the show, but just these really beautiful notes that
yes,
there again add that balance,
yeah,
add that.
yeah, very, very true. Bootleggers has a very distinct, um, you know, I don't want to. I mean, herbal is the right word, but it's not in a green way. It's like in a fresh basil, like a little bit of a fennel. There's something very, very distinct and very consistent across bootleggers that is for our lineup here in Russian River is clearly the most distinct wine in terms of its smell
Mm-hmm.
because it has that like herbal character,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people love that. They think it's really fun to have that kind of that different card to play.
I think it keeps it fun. It makes it pleasurable to drink. I think tasting notes for me, we're getting into this. We do this all day long, but it's fun to share. There isn't like a right answer. I think that's one of my favorite things about having a bottle with somebody else is just those moments of like, oh yeah, like I get that too. We were tasting through some of the Burgundies that we just bottled yesterday, and that was really exciting to just kind of find all of those little notes, like talking through it together.
Yeah,
So that's
those are a little bit
yeah.
harder. Well, they're a little bit more. They require a deeper dictionary of descriptors, right? Like you really got to. There's lots of different things, and there are sometimes words that you don't often use to describe wines, especially for us. We're used to kind of just having a certain type of wine, but the Burgundies are a very, very complex, you
Mm-hmm.
know, subset of expression. So that was fun yesterday.
Yeah, so it's share your bottles. I think it's one of those things that's like so special and unique about wine. And we've been drinking wine as humans since as long as we figured out we could ferment grapes. And it's this like it's a very communal thing. To like break bread, share a glass. I think talk about it when you have a wine that's worth talking about. It's always really exciting, I think, to have a glass that you really want to stick your nose in and spend some time with, and then be like, and now I really want to drink this. Like it's not just interesting; it's also really enjoyable. Mhm.
Love it.
Yeah. Should we do the treehouse?
Treehouse.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you've been public enough now that this is usually Julian's favorite, so
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say it.
It's true. I think I've accepted it more in the last year or so. There's a lot of great wines, and Gaps is usually up there. Yeah, Gaps, Russian River, but then Treehouse in terms of like, I can't get this out. Fourth almost broke on.
Careful.
Uh, Treehouse is, in my opinion, like the most impressive wine. It's got all the checks all the boxes in terms of what one is looking for in like the wine that's going to be kind of like the most impressive. It's going to leave the biggest impression. Uh, it's got it. It jumps out of the glass in terms of its aromatics. It's got so much fruit flavor. It's got so much energy. It's got all these things, but it kind of goes beyond that because it has an energy. It has like a spirit that kind of jumps out at you. It's like the feeling you have when you see a beautiful car or you see this remarkable, this remarkable athlete, like something that's just like, you're like, oh my goodness, like
Mhm.
that did not just happen, like,
Yeah.
or that thing, just, it has that feeling. It's a little bit dark in this room, but it's got an extra. It's usually the darkest wine that we make. Treehouse is a vineyard that is in obviously Russian River. It's also in Green Valley appellation.
Hmm.
This is a pretty unique, special place because it is down Green Valley Road, which is a really beautiful road in itself. That's very classic Russian River. Rolling hills with, kind of like all these little open benches and cattle and apples and vineyards. But then you start to kind of like get deeper and deeper into the northwest part of Sebastopol, and you start seeing these redwoods. But then you start to climb up this pretty, steep road, winding road, kind of just crawling up this, this like almost like it feels like you're coming out of a canyon, but all the vegetation changes, like
Hmm.
the soil changes, it gets super rocky and like manzanita bush, and like you just feel like you're all of a sudden in the foothills. Like
Hmm.
you're like, am I in the Sierras all of a sudden? And like yes, there's more redwoods up there, but there's also all this different vegetation. And then all of a sudden you come out, and then right on this knoll is Treehouse.
Hmm.
And the Treehouse Vineyard it's 360-degree exposure. Um, right on this knoll, and only on this knoll, is this really dark red, terracotta red colored soil. And that's kind of, so you see it, you're just like, man, like that is so unique. And
Hmm.
you look on like literally the fence line of Treehouse Vineyard. There's a vineyard on the other side, another great vineyard, but it's Goldridge.
Hmm.
And you're like, you can see this distinction of like the red, really dark red on the hill, and then it flattens out a little bit, and then it kind of gets a little bit more beigey, and then the tree, the fence line, and then it's just full on beige Goldridge. And there's something special about Treehouse because the wines that come off of it are really, really remarkable.
They are. They're unique. I mean, I do think it's especially tasting these three side by side. And I would say, just like going between the classes already, 21 is standing out a little bit more. I know that was a little bit of a different vintage.
Yeah.
But it's so well, maybe this is why we're in the wine business, right? Is that I'm so fascinated by the like these vineyards are, you know, we can drive in a circle and hit them all in 15, 20 minutes, and they're so different.
Yes, they are.
I mean, they do have that Russian River like characteristic of fruit that you're talking about. There are hallmarks there. It's California, but I would never, Treehouse and Keeper are very different wines.
Very, very
Um,
different. Yeah. Very different wine. Keepers are like lower elevation, a little bit sloping, all south facing, whereas Treehouse has got 360-degree exposure. Um, a lot of heritage clones
mhm.
at the Treehouse. So clonal selections are unique in that they're a little bit more bright fruit and kind of punchy and a little bit more energetic. But Treehouse is always kind of a wine that people kind of turn their head and go, like, what is this? So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think a treehouse is it's such a fun place to visit because like to your point, when you're approaching it, you're in the Russian River Valley, there's things that are familiar, and then you come up and you kind of come up the back of the knoll, you don't realize how high you are. And then when you're at the top of the knoll, it's like all of a sudden you're looking down into this valley, and it's these huge sweeping views, and you realize like the scope and the aspect is so unique. It's a really breathtaking
Yeah, you can see pretty much from
place.
Geyserville to Petaluma
Hmm.
and Mount St. Helena, and it's really, really gorgeous. So, yep, Treehouse, one of my faves. And one of the other wines we didn't talk about that much is the Giusti. So
Hmm.
the Giusti is also in this release. Giusti Ranch, spelled Giusti. So sometimes we get some interesting. Well, people sometimes say Guisti but it's Giusti Ranch, and that's a cool vineyard too. That we've
Hmm.
been making a single vineyard there since 2012. We've been getting the fruit, since probably 2006 or so. But that's an interesting place because um, that property has been farmed for over 150 years.
Oh, wow.
And the Giusti family owned it for that whole time up until just this past year. So we have new owners there for the first time in 150 years. And not so ironically, Giusti is an Italian name. Well, you know, the Italians, when they go anywhere back in the 1800s, what do you think the very first thing they did?
Grapes.
They planted grapes or wine. So the very first crop that was ever planted on Giusti Ranch was grapes. So it went through a lot of different versions of agriculture. Obviously, apples, cherries, apricots, you know, all the different things that Sebastopol has been known for. But it got replanted to grapes in 2002. So kind of a full circle moment. But it's kind of neat to think that, you know, that long ago, the very first settlers on that land said, we need a wine, ate that. It's going to take us a couple years to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is plant grapes. And here we are still making wine on the same property. So pretty cool.
Well, and that's a fun one if you're a member who's been with us for a really long time. You know, we started making Giusti when the vines were really young, and the wines do change as the vines age. And I think that's something that we've really seen, especially when we've done a vertical tasting and gone back further, is that the younger vintages of any wine tend to be more fruit forward, they're bright, and then they, you know, they gain wisdom as they age. And so you get to really see that development. And Giusti, I think, is really hitting this place in the vineyard, so it's creating really, really elegant. I mean, they are more powerful wines, but are definitely kind of coming into themselves.
Yeah, you know, like when we first were making single vineyards out of Giusti, the tannins, for example, like first of all, it was really exuberantly fruity.
Yep.
We used to call it juicy, really fruity, which was cool. But the tannins and the structure, they were like a little bit kind of, I don't know, just a little rougher, right? And now the tannins on Giusti are really way more mature, and they kind of come together a little easier, a little smoother, still really structured and powerful. But they're kind of tucked into the landscape of the wine much better than they were before. Whereas before it was kind of like, okay, this is a tannic wine. But now they're a little bit more integrated, kind of, and it's not like a winemaking thing as much as it's just the maturity that the vineyards are producing fruit that's just a little bit more, you know, adaptable to making more integrated wines. So Juicy is great. I also really love that fruit too.
Yeah.
So and it's a very popular wine for us. Yeah. So really, really good.
Well, we also have Chardonnay. So we have the Bootlegger's Hill Chardonnay and El Diablo and our 116, which is our blend, our appellation blend. So if you are a Chardonnay lover, those are beautiful wines. And you can just ask to speak to Paige if you're calling winery and have questions, because I love our Chardonnay program just as much as our Pinot program. But yeah, I think the 24s, it's been a really lovely to get to check in on these wines.
I love the 24 116. I love the El Diablo, but I really like the bootleggers. That's Paige's typical favorite. This year, I'm just gonna yield to different preference and say yes, bootleggers is extraordinary. And I love the 116. You know, it was compared to some of the other vintages. I think it's just a touch more. I don't know, just approachable. Like it's just a round wine, but it's still light. You know, we try to kind of thread that needle between something that tastes refreshing and, you know, has kind of more neutral aromatics, which means it's not a really fruity Chardonnay. It's more, you know, you get a little bit of hint of barrel, but it's more like green apple and lemon and kind of like the more kind of acid-driven fruit character. And then you taste it, and you kind of like initially you get that you know, kind of zippy impression, but then you get this beautiful richness on the mid, and then it finishes really crisp, and kind of you have this really nice shape, and it checks the box of both the wines that are refreshing and the wines that are really generous. So because I think Chardonnay is it's you know, you gotta find that balance. You can't go too far in either direction, because Chardonnay, in my opinion, is not best on either side of the spectrum. I think it's really best in the middle. If you can kind of capture both, if not, you know, two or three of those different components.
I would agree.
So yeah, really, really beautiful. Great vintage for 2024 Chardonnay.
So how would you say, Julian, we're in the production lounge because harvest is going in full swing.
Yep.
So it's 2026, right? So how is 2026 start? I mean, our earliest pick in history.
Earliest, yeah.
But we're still moving along.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
So very good. So as Paige mentioned, we picked El Diablo Chardonnay in July. It was the early. We've never picked any grapes in July, and it was so first time we ever did that. And I was kind of mapping out the last couple picks. We're by now about halfway done with the Chardonnay, a little bit more than halfway. And I was kind of mapping out the last, several picks here because now everything's kind of getting right. Like everything is kind of happening at once. You always have your stuff at the beginning, and you always have the stuff that takes forever, and then you have a lot of stuff obviously that's new. And you hit that week or two where you're like, okay, like bring your mouthpieces to work, buckle up, like let's go. And here we are with that. We're gonna probably pick out all of our Chardonnay before August is over. And for Russian River, it got off to a really early start as well. We picked Juicy Ranch on August 7th, along with Moonshine Vineyard from Russian River. And then we were like, we thought we were going to get going pretty quickly, but then the weather cooled down and things had been kind of nice because it slowed down a little bit. But then again, like I mentioned, starting at the end of this week into next week, it's going to get very, very busy because we have fruit coming in from Santa Rita, San Lucia, Anderson Valley, Russian River, and Sonoma Coast. That's when everything starts to kind of overlap a little bit. But it's an early vintage. It's a small vintage. Sometimes early vintages also are small because they ripen when you have less clusters on the vine. They ripen faster. So it is a small vintage, small berries, dark wines, concentrated flavors. I think it's going to be a really, really good year. Everything tastes really good in the vineyard. Before the picking window kind of opens, like you're tasting the flavors, and the flavors are great. And then you go run the analysis on the grapes. You're like, oh, I can't pick that. I mean, you get 12% alcohol wine. Like it's a little too low, and it'd be, it's not, it wouldn't fit the style. So you wait an extra week, and you just get more flavor. So I think it's gonna be really good.
Exciting.
So far, we drained our first Pinot Noir today. Wow. Those first two tanks I was talking about, Moonshine and Juicy, and they're really, really good. So I think we're gonna be in good hands this year.
Exciting.
Yeah. So
great.
So when does this release wrap up?
When's this release wrap up? It wraps up next Thursday. So you have the rest of this week and this weekend, and then final day will be next Thursday. So you do have a guaranteed allocation, so you can take some time to look that through, see what you're interested in. If you have any questions, we have an amazing team here on site that is super happy to talk to you on the phone, answer your emails. You may have gotten a text from us. So whatever your preferences for communication, we're happy to talk to you that way. If you happen to be visiting us out here, we can help you in person. So I think it's a really, we've been working to get to this point, as Julien mentioned at the beginning, to be able to hold on to the bottles a little bit longer. For all of you who went through this transition with us last year, thank you. And really excited to offer these really beautiful wines.
Yeah, really, really good. And then to look ahead, the next release is going to be the Burgundies, which is going to be coming at the end of September.
Yep, kind of end of September, beginning of October, we'll have the Burgundy release. So that's really exciting, that project. And then we always have some special somethings around the holidays, and then we'll be getting into spring, which is the other wines that you all know and love that we produce. So
yeah, comes around. The years go by fast.
They do.
So we better enjoy them while we can.
Absolutely, with the beautiful glass of wine. So thank you so much for joining us, and we always love to hear from you, anything and everything. So if there's a bottle that you're particularly loving, we do love to hear those notes. Some of you send us pictures and notes and
Stories.
the occasions that you're enjoying it with, and that really fills us with joy. And we also love to see you here. And if there's anything you'd love to see from us, whether it's this kind of thing, a different style of webinar or Zoom, we've been playing around with some kooky ideas, but we'd love to hear what you want to hear from us. And we'll keep you up to date and look forward to hopefully raising a glass with you soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Paige. Well, thank you.
Cheers.
Pleasure to talk to you as always.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.